Good morning. Welcome to worship. We're starting a new worship series theme today, Live Like You'll Live Forever. Maybe you've heard the advice to live like you are dying, to take advantage of every second we have here on this earth. We could apply that to our lives as Christians in a right way, but maybe it's more accurate to give the advice to live like we're going to live forever, because we know we are going to have life in heaven forever. How might that affect how we live even now? That's what we're going to explore in this worship series. In that theme, today we're celebrating All Saints' Day, a day where we remember all the believers now experiencing perfection in heaven. And remember that for us too, life gets better when the Lord finally gives us heaven on the basis of what Jesus has done for us. And a reading once again from Isaiah chapter 25. On this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of wines. On this mountain, he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all peoples, the sheet that covers all nations. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace from all the earth. The Lord has spoken. In that day, they will say, "Surely this is our God. We trusted in him, and he saved us. This is the Lord. We trusted in him. Let us rejoice and be glad in his salvation." It is difficult, impossible even, for us people to know exactly what heaven is. We are sinful people. We've never experienced a sinless place. Martin Luther, in trying to relate what heaven is to his 6-year-old son Hans, compared heaven with a garden, where his son could always play with his friends as much as he wanted, just to relate that heaven is a place of joy that Jesus has prepared for us. It's difficult for us sinful people to appreciate how amazing a sinless place would be. And so the book of Revelation tells us what heaven is not. It's not a place where we will mourn. It's not a place of pain. It's not a place where we'll feel uncomfortable hunger or thirst. It's not a place where the sun will beat down on us. We know what it is to live in a world deeply affected by sin. Heaven is not that. Sometimes cartoons or caricatures could paint the picture of heaven as a boring place, as rows of people all dressed in choir robes with a halo over their head, singing for an eternity, and it can seem boring. But there's nothing boring about the real heaven. A sinless place doesn't mean a boring place. Sin isn't actually something that satisfies us as much as the devil might tempt us to believe that that's true. In fact, Isaiah described heaven specifically as a place that does satisfy. Isaiah described heaven as a feast with rich foods. And we heard that those rich foods are the finest meats. For the Hebrew people Isaiah was writing to, these meats would be meats that are full of fat. He even describes them to the people as full of marrow. These were rich meats. It would be something that would satisfy. At the banquet of heaven, there is the finest of wines there. The way Isaiah again described it to the Hebrew people he was communicating with was the dregs of the wine. Not that there was stuff floating around in the wine. Isaiah made sure to say that this is refined wine. But the dregs meant that it was the end of a batch. And so if it hadn't been drunk yet, it was aged. That there is good vintage wine at the feast of heaven. Isaiah is painting the picture of the best, most satisfying meal a person, especially a person in his culture, could have ever had. It would be appropriate for us to think of the best meal we've ever had as a reminder that there is something even better coming. No matter what that meal would be for you, we know that what's coming is even better, even more satisfying because of who is preparing the meal. We heard that it is the Lord Almighty who is preparing this meal. If you are familiar with the King James translation of the Bible, the Lord Almighty was translated the Lord of Hosts in that King James version. Lord of Hosts, that phrase reminds us that this is the God who has power over the hosts of heaven, over the powerful angels. That God is the one who's giving the feast. He has access to the finest meats. What would that God have in his wine cellar? Isaiah said that this would all happen on this mountain. And that mountain he was talking about was at Jerusalem. Because that's where the Lord's temple was. That's where God's people were. So this would all come about through God's people. And he said specifically that this would be for all peoples. So even we, as 21st century Americans, can enjoy this feast with 8th century BC Israel, whom Isaiah was communicating with. This is an amazing feast, and you will be at the feast. But there's something standing in between where we are now and this feast. And that thing is death. We have to experience death first before we experience this place that will satisfy forever. Death is an uncomfortable thing for people to think about, to say the least. Maybe you heard the news recently about the SpaceX rocket booster that was caught before it crashed into the ground. This was big news if you're interested in getting to other planets, because this would make it more in reach to do that in the future. You might wonder, why do people want to get to other planets at all? Well, people look around and see things like war, like climate change. And they see that this earth is not going to last forever, so maybe eventually we'll need another one. People fear the death of us as a species, because then we lose all achievement, all legacy. It's gone in death. People worry about that, but more often people worry about individual death, our own death. We've seen the death of some of the people around us, and we know that it is going to happen to each of us. And that's a terrifying problem. Death is a terrifying problem because of how all-encompassing it is. Isaiah described it as the sheet that covers all nations. Like we all have this thing hanging over our head, this one big problem that we can't escape. Death is so awful because of the tears that it brings. Who doesn't carry around at least some grief from someone they've lost? Who hasn't cried at the death of a loved one? Death. When we're forced to consider our own, because we are forced, whether it's at a funeral, or because of an illness we're going through, or a near-death experience, we're all forced to consider our own death. That thinking can feel so awful that it can make us doubt where we might be on the other side of death, because death seems so final. And because here's what we see death in our future, and we remember our sins. We see death, remember our sins, and know what we deserve after death. That I don't deserve to be at the feast. In fact, sometimes when I picture myself there, maybe I picture myself a little bit like an imposter. Like I would have had to sneak in to the feast because I know all of the reasons that I shouldn't be there. The guilt, the regret. Death is such a powerful force that it can make us uncertain about our salvation. In referencing one of these verses from Isaiah, St. Paul said, "Death is swallowed up by victory. And thanks be to God, who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." Jesus beat death. As Jesus considered death, he didn't think about it as something that was all-encompassing and forever, because for him, it wouldn't be. Jesus beat death. He swallowed up death for us. That's what we heard in Isaiah. He swallowed it up so that death wouldn't swallow us up. Jesus destroyed this sheet that covers all nations. He took away that shroud that enfolds all people. Jesus won the victory against death for us. Jesus' victory is all-encompassing. It's for us. We know that because Jesus rose from the dead, we also will. Jesus was in the grave for 3 days, and he rose from the dead, beating death. This thing that can't be beaten, this inevitable thing for us, Jesus made temporary. The Lord will wipe away tears from all faces. Jesus has made the grief of death temporary, because we know that we are not going to stay in death forever. Death is not going to hold a claim on us. It didn't hold a claim on Jesus. He has freed us from death. And when he's freed us from death, when he's raised us to life and taken us to heaven, there the Lord will wipe away all of our tears. We won't carry around any more grief. No more fear. The sovereign Lord will make sure there is no sadness for you at the feast of heaven. We won't remember and be afraid and think about death, because we will only experience life forever. There, the Lord will remove all disgrace from his people. Yes, Jesus has already died on the cross to take away each and every one of our sins. In heaven, we will experience that to the full. No more sin, no more guilt, even the feelings then, God will make sure to take away from you forever. Jesus won the victory over death. But death is such a powerful force that when we look it in the face, it is very difficult not to feel uncertain about what's going to happen afterward, no matter how many times we're reminded. But what if one day God came to you? And for you, the Lord ripped open space and time to show you yourself in the future. To show you yourself sitting down at the feast of heaven. And you hear yourself say, I trusted in God, and He saved me. He came through for me. I'm so happy to be here. How confident would you then be about your place in heaven? Well, that's exactly what the Lord does for you in verse 9 from Isaiah. He shows you what you are going to say at the feast of heaven. This is a certainty. You will be at the feast because the Lord has spoken. The Lord Almighty, the Lord of hosts, the sovereign Lord has told you that this is what's going to happen for you because Jesus died on the cross for you. You will be at the feast. You know that for sure. How might that change our attitude toward life? How might that change how we live even now? Because we know we will be at the feast as a certainty. Well, that's what we're going to explore in this worship series. We'll see that with that glimpse of heaven, we go out and bravely share the gospel. We bravely confess our faith. That this leads us to live generous lives for others. That we live free from the fear of the judgment that comes after death. All with our eyes fixed on heaven. For now, come to the mountain. The mountain where God promises you a taste of that heavenly feast. Come to the mountain and sit at the foot of the cross where Jesus won your seat at the feast. You won't be an imposter there because Jesus earned your place for you through His death on the cross. Read in the Gospels about how exactly Jesus won your place. Come to the mountain. To the Lord's Supper, where you receive a taste in Jesus' body and blood of the joy that we will have forever when God finally makes us completely sinless and lets us experience that. Come to the mountain. At worship, where we gather with God's people. Come to the mountain with all of your grief and fear and guilt, where the Lord takes it away from you and gives you something that satisfies. The good news of Jesus, forgiveness, the promise of heaven. You will be at the feast. Amen. Please stand.